CGNAT is an abomination and IPv4 needs to die. The purpose of the internet is to provide a network in which any computer can connect to any other computer. And CGNATs basically go against this, because the CGNAT is basically a way to try to prolong the use of IPv4 when it really shouldn't be used anymore. You see, IPv4, as it is 32-bit, it only gives some 40 billion, about that many, some 40 billion plus IP addresses. So basically there can only be up to that many, like theoretically up to that many unique devices on the internet at any given time, and only 4 billion is too few. The internet was not initially designed to cover the entire earth, perhaps. It was like designed for like some USA government, like some military and some universities and whatever would be connected to the internet and all that stuff. So it was some sort of a communication protocol. No, not a protocol, but IPv4 is a protocol, but like the internet was like initially designed for like the USA government purposes, for like connecting all the militaries and universities or whatever. So like that's the kind of use case they had, so they would have thought that 32 bits must be enough. But then the internet ended up covering the entire earth, and it turns out that 32 bits is not enough after all. So this means that IPv4 should just be left behind, and everyone should just use IPv6. IPv6 of course being the better option. So it has way more bits, well enough of them to allow people to do their thing and for everyone to have a unique IP address on the internet. So IPv4, the thing with that is that because it doesn't fundamentally allow everyone to have a unique public IP address, people have come up with elaborate ways to try to prolong the use of it, such as the NAT and also the CGNAT, whatever all these things like are, because like the thing is, those are just complicated ways to try to keep it going, because like I said, the public IP addresses would otherwise run out, but there are ways to overcome that with trade-offs. CGNAT is one of them, where instead of everyone who gets an IP address, like from an ISP, instead of them getting a public IP address at all, they get a private IP address in a private network. It's basically like a local area network, except on a large scale, and that local area network IP address would be your public IP address. And that's just horrible, because now you don't have a public IP address. Like, theoretically, you can have these nested private networks, and like you could like theoretically in some ways like extend that to however far you want, however many layers of private networks. You could have theoretically, like, you could come up with some bizarre system where you have these nested IPv4 private networks, and you could have up to like whoever knows how many large numbers of IP addresses. So in that sense, you could connect everyone on Earth to the IPv4 network. So it could be used, but there's a big problem with that, because now you are using a private network. You are on a private network, so you don't have a public IP address. You see, if your ISP gives you a CGNAT IP address, IPv4 address, and does not give you an IPv6 address at all, then you are stuck with it. You don't have any other options. And this is a fundamental problem, because being under a private network means that you lose the abilities and the advantages that come with having a public IP address. So this is basically the ability to connect any other computer to any other computer. So in the sense, so specifically, you lose all the self-hosting capabilities. And this, I believe, is terrible. This is very bad. This is really bad. And I say it is enough reason to say that IPv4 and CGNAT specifically are evil and they should be eradicated. And let me explain why I involve moral right and wrong here. You see, I believe that in the future, that the internet and the use of it should head into the direction of promoting more self-hosting and peer-to-peer connections, because I don't like the centralized services, things like social media and whatever. Those things have pretty bad effects on people and society. And so, believing in the idea that the internet should be heading in a more peer-to-peer, self-hosted direction, where everyone would be self-hosting their own content, instead of relying on these big social media platforms, these centralized services. Because I believe in that sort of a goal, and I would support all the peer-to-peer things and self-hosting, these are ideas that the CGNAT stands against, because it makes it physically impossible, basically, to do these sorts of things. So, as much as people talk about problems facing the internet, like some state surveillance or whatever, all the things like that, important as they are, I believe the biggest threat and the biggest problem facing the internet and its future is compromising and corrupting the very physical infrastructure that is the internet itself. Because the internet is a physical network, it is physical infrastructure in the physical world. You have there is infrastructure, and the infrastructure can be made the right way or the wrong way. And if you do the infrastructure the wrong way, you implement it wrong, you use bad IPv4 protocols when it really should just be eradicated entirely. You know, IPv4 has been on life support for like 2 decades now. It has been brain dead and on life support, and it's time to put an end to this. IPv4 just needs to be left behind. There's no reason to keep it going, not really. And even if you did still keep using the IPv4 CGNAT things, at least you should have the option to get an IPv6 address also, because then you would get at least a public IPv6 address. Inherently, there's nothing wrong with having IPv4 CGNAT along with IPv6. As long as you get an IPv6 address, then everything is good. Whatever else you also get, it doesn't do it does no detriment in that. So you can still have your CGNAT IPv4 address, so long as you have also an IPv6 address. So the problem I'm specifically talking about is when ISPs do not give you an IPv6 address. That is the problem. So using a CGNAT with IPv4 exclusively, that is a really big problem, and it needs to end. IPv6 should be offered to everyone universally, and then eventually IPv4 should just be phased out over time, but IPv6 should be mandatory. Yeah, I would basically be in favor of laws, like state laws, that like any nation state or any kind of state, government, whatever you wanna call it, like a law that requires a regulation that mandates IPv6 usage. IPv6 has to be given to everyone. So, like I was saying, when you use the bad IPv4 protocols on the physical network, the physical infrastructure that is internet, you basically deny the people the freedom that should be given to them by internet. Just the concept of the internet is supposed to be the network that connects any computer to any other computer. So to have freedom on the internet means that everyone should have the freedom to connect to any other computer, which means that they require by definition the capability to do so. So if you deny people the ability to do all the self-hosting and peer-to-peer connections and everything like that, you are denying people the freedom that they must have. Otherwise you're just giving them this corrupted, bad internet. And also, because of the nature of the private networks, the CGNAT basically, it reinforces this idea of the client-server relationship and these centralized services that everyone connects to. And I believe that is just wrong, that is morally wrong. Because the future of the internet should be heading towards the self-hosted and peer-to-peer ways of doing things. Everyone should have the ability to self-host their own content. That's freedom, and people should have freedom on the internet. So basically, you're denying freedom if you don't give people a public internet IPv6 address on the internet. IPv4 being sold to the people as the internet is basically just it's just wrong. Yeah, you're giving a partial internet, really. Like, you're not giving the internet, you are not giving the function of the internet. So that's why I believe that, but like this thing, but you're still giving a partial internet, and that's why I think it's a problem, because you give the illusion that people have the internet, when really you're just corrupting it and denying people their freedom and reinforcing these bad client-server relationships where some centralized services, some social media things and whatever are doing harm to society. You're really just reinforcing all of that. And of course there's the control, because you are in a private network under a CGNAT. So that's of course bad. So it's against freedom. There are issues at stake here that concern ethics. And yeah, I believe that not giving people an IPv6 address is a moral wrong, and it should be required by law that IPv6 be given by ISPs to the users of those ISP. And really there's no reason to not to implement such laws, because like IPv6 has been around for a long time now. They have just artificially been prolonging the use of IPv4 with these CGNAT things and whatever. But they're just bad, and you shouldn't use them, or I mean, if that's all you're given, then you're just stuck with it. You can't not use it, unless you just don't use the internet as it is given to you. So yeah, it's a big problem, because everyone should deserve the freedom to use the internet freely, to have the ability to connect to any other computer. So that's why I believe it's the biggest threat facing the internet and the future of the internet, because if you corrupt the internet, then you just over time you just lose all the freedom. And it just becomes this distorted version of what the internet once might have been. but while giving you still the illusion of having the internet, because you still have some functionality, you still have the ability to connect to the centralized services, but you lose the internet as it is supposed to be. It's basically this perverted version of the internet. This world where only IPv4 is used and some stupid CGNAT things are all that you get. That's just bad. So yeah, you should use and promote the use of IPv6, because IPv6 is a requirement. It is a necessity for the future of the internet. If you care about freedom and the freedom to use the internet, freedom in the net, so if you want the liberation of cyberspace, you have to support IPv6 because it's required. You can't not support it and want freedom at the same time. If you value freedom, you are in favor of freedom, then you have to support IPv6. There's just no other way. If you support IPv4 over IPv6, then you're just confused. Because IPv4 promotes everything that is against freedom, basically. Yeah. The only way to continue using the IPv4 is by those stupid ways of, you can just keep nesting more and more private networks. And it's just a big mess. Yeah, that's not the way to do it. Just use IPv6. So yeah, that's that for this speech. Thanks for listening. Until next time, bye.